Welcome, everybody, to episode 14 of the Orange Wheel podcast, the podcast where we support business leaders understanding the monetary transition. I'm joined today by Ignacio Ferrer-Bonsoms Hernández. Ignacio is a Spanish attorney and the president of the Blockchain Arbitration and Commerce Society, BACS, where he's pioneering new frameworks for digital law, tokenized governance, and decentralized dispute resolution. With nearly 20 years legal experience and a deep focus on blockchain, AI, and international law, Ignacio is a leading voice in the legal dimensions of the digital transformation. He's also the author of the groundbreaking new book, Le Digital Bitcoin, also available in English, Bitcoin Digital Law, which makes a provocative yet increasingly relevant case. Bitcoin and digital assets are not just financial innovations, they are indeed self-executing legal systems emerging from the internet itself. Ignacio's work challenges traditional legal paradigms and proposes a future where law can be written in code, executed across networks, and enforced without states. As the world shifts towards digitally native institutions, his contributions are helping the legal infrastructure for the next monetary era. All right. Really cool to have you on today, Ignacio. Glad you could be here today.
Thank you.
So I haven't read your book yet, but now that it's on my radar, I'm excited to kind of dive deeper into it. But I think I've garnered a little bit of an understanding of some of the themes that you explore in that book, and it does sound quite groundbreaking. I think one of the really fascinating things about Bitcoin is that it touches so many different aspects of our world, not only finance and economics, but also things like culture and in this case, legal systems. So maybe to open up, Ignacio, like you've said that Bitcoin is not just money, it's also a new form of law or legal code. Can you just elaborate a bit more on what you mean by that?
Yes, thank you so much. Yes, when I started studying Bitcoin at first, whenever anyone is starting studying Bitcoin, they think about Bitcoin as a monetary or as a coin, and in general, the economists are the first who started talking about Bitcoin, and the thoughts are always can be money or not, and can be like gold or digital gold. Also, Bitcoin is called as digital gold, and those things are really interesting. But in the end, and this is very internet, everything you can sum up everything in peer-to-peer network. So in Bitcoin, this is very clear, but this is a transfer of value peer-to-peer, so equal to equal. No? But if you want to create something that is peer-to-peer, you need some rules to do that. And the essence of private law is peer-to-peer relationship, binding relations. So that's private law. So when you first start thinking about Bitcoin, you have to think who is supporting the rules of Bitcoin, because it's true that there are some rules that are supporting Bitcoin. So from the monetary point of view, they say, yes, it's a deflationary token, for instance. There are a lot of comparatives between Bitcoin and gold, and you can say, okay, this is like gold. But the difference is that gold has natural rules. In the case of Bitcoin, the rules are human. So someone thought of the rules. So in the end, we are talking about law. So that was my conclusion. So if we are talking about law, we are talking about ruling and a new way of ruling and a new way of making laws, and they are digital laws. So in the 90s, when we started using programs, Lessig, he created this theory about code is law. And many people in the Web3, they say code is law, and that's it. So everything is solved in the blockchain. So in general, Web3 guys, they say that we don't need anything else. That's not true, and that's not enough. Because first of all, code is law. It means that you can rule, for instance, creating a software. So as a creator of a software, you are ruling. But the space or the effects of the rules are perhaps only in your computer, are the ones who are using your computer or interacting with your computer. In this case, with Bitcoin is bigger because this is a decentralized law in a new jurisdiction that is the internet. So if you talk to someone who is working on theory of law, perhaps they would say that we cannot accept jurisdiction as internet because it's anywhere. We don't know what is it. It's nowhere. But of course it is. It's internet. So this is a new concept. the internet jurisdiction. And for me, Bitcoin is the first example of this new way of ruling. So it's a digital law, it's a private law, it's binding, and there are also is democracy. That there are democracy because you can vote and introduce some improvements with BIPs. So there is a parliament, digital parliament, but it's working. So there are some improvements that have been approved, others rejected. So we have all these concepts of law in a new way. I also explained that there is the internet jurisdiction is like the layer one, and then layer two are the states. So you can be in China and you cannot use Bitcoin, but you can go to Dubai and you use Bitcoin and you don't pay taxes for that. So
Very cool.
You now we have another jurisdiction that is different from the state jurisdiction, and then we can work on this new jurisdiction. And for me, it's very huge because we are not like thinking how to work on this new jurisdiction and how we can evolve and how we can grow. So more or less, this is the kind of reflection I try to make with the book.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, just some reflections there. I mean, I'm not myself a legal expert, so I'll kind of come in with a bit of a layperson's perspective, but I can understand how we even though the internet itself has been around since the 90s, I mean, by mainstream adoption of the internet, you can understand how the legal frameworks have been challenged already, even in that idea about, copyright legislations, intellectual property, jurisdictional boundaries, that was already being challenged, but it seemed like we were still trying to fit it into our existing paradigm and frameworks. But now the step change to really having significant value associated with a decentralized network necessitates a fundamentally new paradigm of thinking about it, right? I mean, so I can kind of appreciate how revolutionary this step change to Bitcoin has become, and I guess it'll probably through this process, I could imagine actually coming up with a more robust framework for the law of the the jurisdiction that is cyberspace, or that is the internet, as you put it. So I think it's just a really fascinating subject matter. How do you expect? I don't know. How do you expect this to sort of be implemented, in the sense that I guess presently laws for political jurisdictions, they'll have their own means by which to kind of create or change existing legal structures. Is it going to be kind of just groups of programmers, as we saw with Bitcoin, from a diaspora of different parts of the world kind of coming together with a common objective or goal and designing their new governance frameworks? Or what's the means by which new legal structures are founded in your view?
Yes, for me, the first thing we have to understand is that we are witnessing a new jurisdiction and a new way of doing things. So that's for me important. Also, one of the books that I mentioned in the book is in my book, Bitcoin Digital Law, is the sovereign individual. More or less, they explain, or I understood there that in general, we think that the first thing is ideology. So you can be capitalist, or you can be a communist, or you can love democracy. But in the end, the first aspect is power and technique, and power and technique are very connected. So in an economy, so the governance is more or less concerned with these aspects. So that's why we needed a new law, for instance, that was the commercial law in the Middle Ages. Why? Because we started to make business not next door, but far away. So we needed a new law. So Roman law and canon law was not enough at that time. So the technique changed and the commerce changed. So now we are witnessing the same thing, more or less. We are witnessing a new way of doing business that is on the internet. So several years ago, it was like almost impossible to buy things on the internet. Imagine clothes. We couldn't imagine anyone buying clothes on the internet, but now it's so common. You buy them and you keep them, or you give them back them. So more or less, the idea is that we are using more and more internet, and this is something we cannot stop. So from my point of view, the new way of governance is going to be new. So we cannot think the model is like the modern state, that is hierarchical, but the internet, that is this new technique, is the opposite, because it's peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer, not only to share information that was the beginning of the internet, that we are changing value and creating laws. And this is new. So because this is new, the way we have to think is not in a local way. So that's what happens with states. When they are facing these new technologies, they say, okay, here in my country, you can do this or you cannot do that. Okay, that's good, but that's not enough because internet is worldwide and it applies worldwide. And if you are using a decentralized weapon, you cannot do anything to stop it. That's what happened with Bitcoin, and that's what happens with other tools like, for instance, BitTorrent, that is still working. So you can say, hey, you cannot use it here. We are witnessing a new jurisdiction that is the internet. It's real.
Fascinating. And I guess, as you brought up earlier, you kind of mentioned, okay, the states can still they can still regulate the interface, I suppose, right, between the physical world in which they have jurisdiction and the digital decentralized internet, where it's a new legal jurisdiction. So you'll have these different variants. As you said, China can censor certain things, North Korea can censor certain things, etc. But they can't actually influence the underlying matrix, I guess, of the internet itself.
Yes. Of course, that's a reality. We cannot think ideally like, okay, we should do this or that. That's not the way of work on here. For me, the way is understanding that we are having new tools in our hands where we can start making, for instance, businesses and in a way different than before and facing these problems that we have. For instance, tokenization. If we talk about tokenization, many tokenizations are not real because they are not connected with the real world. And for me, that's a key problem. And that's why I came up with this idea of blockchain arbitration and commerce society. Because if you say, because we are talking all the time about, in general, about private law. Bitcoin is private law. For us, it's money, and we use it as money. That's it. That's full enough. So if for us, because the technique is the importance. So imagine that we are using a token as a share of a company. So where was it registered? On the internet? Yes, but I cannot recognize it as for instance, as a company. In your country, no. But on my jurisdiction, yes. And we are making, doing businesses. And even more, this is better. This is the best way of doing business because we can do whatever we want with the token. We can offer to third parties and create more tokens, reduce them. You can do a lot of things with this new technique, but this is a decentralized way of doing things. But first of all, we have to understand that we have the tools in front of us, but we have to understand how to use them. So having this, how do you bind something that is private? You have to say, okay, for me, for you and for me, this is going to be the shares of a company. Okay, we produce it, we create this digital law, like this is going to be the share of a company, and we are going to make businesses. But inside the code is where you have to legislate. So you have to introduce the option of self-execution, also of execution. In the case of a dispute, you have a tribunal of arbitration who is going to take your token to enforce the token. So this cannot happen in the real world because you need to attend a court. Then the court will have to create or to draft the sentence, and then someone, perhaps the policeman, will have to go there and take your things. So that's what happens in the real world. But if we understand that we can, with this new technique, regulate in the code because it's private law, then you can evolve. I think you need to introduce justice mechanisms. If not, it's impossible because it's impossible for both sides, not only for states. Because states, they want to regulate, but okay, they make a lot of laws, but in general they are red light laws. You cannot do this, you can't do that. More or less, okay, I have a license, then I can work on Europe. I'll make a license. Okay, you can work. Okay, but then if I got a problem with my tokens, what happens? Nothing. No solution for that. If we don't introduce within the code the solution, then we are in the first step of this new world. Nothing. So it's also, states must adapt. So it's not, for me, it's not a war against the states, although perhaps at the beginning with the cyberpunks movement and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and cartography, perhaps it was like that. But in the end, we need like to have a balance. states must adapt to this new way of doing things.
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of kind of comparisons or analogies with, I guess, the economic elements of Bitcoin as well, in the sense that I don't think it's necessarily that the existing financial structure could become completely obsolete, but it will become Bitcoinified, right? Bitcoin will become the new fundamental monetary base layer, and the new financial architecture built upon that will have to adapt. And I guess but there is, of course, that tension and conflict that emerges when it comes to, as you mentioned, power at the end of the day, right? Because there will be a relative shift of power from the incumbent nation states, let's say, when it comes to economics, the power to control the money supply and the cost of borrowing. That will diminish their power. And I guess in this case, there'll be, as you said, more of economic activity, and I guess innovation will occur outside of the physical jurisdiction, and more of it will occur in the internet, and their ability to actually create the legislation. It won't, and I guess, I don't know, I'm just kind of freewheeling here, right? But to what extent will it be nation states and their legislators, their parliament, elected officials, being the ones creating new laws, versus it being, as you said, in the private space, just decentralized groups of people coming together to come up with their own legal structures for whatever project or venture it is that they want to do. So I don't know if I have a question, but I'm just kind of like, I can appreciate, I guess, the magnitude and profundity of this change. Are there maybe to steer it back to the BACS, the society you put together? What is the objective of the Arbitration Commerce Society? And maybe on the back end of that, like, have you had discussions with legislators in Spain or other countries or the EU? To what extent are they aware of this change and like trying to adapt already and prepare for it? So yeah, double-ended question.
Yes. For me, there are also what you mentioned before. The first, for me, one thing that is like very sad, but is normal, is that the Web3 community right now is more mature, but in general it was very immature. So sometimes you hear a lot of critics against banks because Bitcoin is a decentralized monetary system and so on. But in the end, bankers and traditional people, they know how to use money. So if you think about Bitcoin now is in 120,000, so it's very high, but everything is very calm. So that's very strange. Now for me, it's like, okay, what is going on here? Yes, because I think the right hands are keeping right hands in the sense that they are going to keep the money there, the Bitcoin there. They are keeping the money. Who are those people? Banks and traditional people. They know the story. They know they have to wait for 30 years or 50 years or 100 years, and they are calm. So we are in a more mature environment. But so we are trying to be like the new system, but we don't have this maturity. So this is a problem for Web3. So we need both sides. We cannot like doing everything without taking account of the past. So I think both sides needs to be mixed, but changing. All of us were changing. So in that sense, I think states, they will adapt because they will realize, first of all, this is a private law. Bitcoin is a private law. So yes, I am working with some groups. There is a kind of advisory group about how to solve disputes. So I said, okay, about this I have some ideas. First of all, how do you consider a blockchain? So some in this committee, they were thinking about blockchains as outstanding, I don't know how to translate it into English, but relevant facts. A blockchain is a relevant fact. So in the case of a dispute, these facts are really important. But I said, no, there are no facts. There is a law. So there are rules that we are taking part of the blockchain, we accept as rule. So they are digital laws. So that's the first thing. So if you want to solve disputes, you have to understand that this is a law. And the second point is that you have to understand that you need to introduce this like a legal oracle to execute within the code. Because if not, you are legislating from outside. So you are not respecting the rules of this new private law. So we are starting having these kind of discussions, but we're at the beginning. So, and I don't know how they are going to react, but I think sooner or later we need this. So sooner or later, states will understand, because it's for their own interest, that we need like to introduce this kind of mechanisms. So that's regarding these BACs, blockchain arbitration and commerce society, and this effort to regulate within the code. So more or less is it's what I say, because if not, it's impossible. You can try to seize a Bitcoin, but you cannot do that. So imagine that when they try to seize Bitcoin cryptocurrencies, it's not possible. They can follow them through the internet, and sooner or later, like in the case of Mr. God, that's it. So you have to be following the cryptocurrency for years until they go to an exchange, and then you grasp it. But it's really difficult to seize. It's very difficult to regulate outside the code. So, and also as a society, as a Web3 society, we need to regulate inside the code. So Bitcoin, as an example, for me is good. And I respect Bitcoin a lot, of course. But if we want to build something more, we need to introduce this kind of rules and legal oracles inside the protocols. If not, this is a casino. That's it. We are like betting up and down, but we are not growing. It's impossible.
So do you envision that Bitcoin's code itself will be enhanced through, as you mentioned, BIP's proposals, and it will, as a result, become more sophisticated? Or to what extent will that happen versus different blockchains providing different functionality? Ethereum already has smart contract functionality, is a bit more sophisticated, I guess, than Bitcoin. I guess the reason I partially ask is I guess it's an area that is quite a controversial one, I think, within the extent to which Bitcoin itself should, I guess, change. So some people are purists that believe, minimize the changes to the source code. And others, I think, are more flexible. We've had that discussion about knots and core, and in the past it was the block size wars. So, do you have a particular view on how Bitcoin will evolve over time, and to what extent other chains will satisfy that gap?
I think Bitcoin is going to be as it's now. I understand, because the value of Bitcoin is that you are not, this is also a law principle. The rules of Bitcoin are, you can change them, but you need the approval of 51% of nodes. But imagine that you have a lot of Bitcoins and you are a node and you are going to vote some huge changes. Perhaps it can affect the value of the cryptocurrency. So it's very difficult to change Bitcoin, I think, because of its value. And this is one of the rules that people like of Bitcoin, because it's immutable. So that's one of the values. So when some people criticize Bitcoin and they say that Bitcoin is nothing, that is a very common argument. I counter-argument and saying, okay, do you believe in your constitution, the constitution of your country? They say yes. You know that there is not, that there is some times that politicians, they can use the constitution on their own favor. The power is not separated. So they mix power. They say, yes, it happens. And I said, that cannot happen in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is a more robust law than a constitution of a country. And this is true, and that's why some people, they keep Bitcoin. Yes, because it's a deflationary token. It's ruled to be deflationary. And there is another point, that is the halving. So some people, they say, okay, Bitcoin is just offer and demand. The offer is deflationary, of course. But what do you think about the halving? For me, the halving is another deflationary tool for the demand. So sooner or later, nodes, they will rise the price up because of the halving. You need nodes. You need, of course, offer and demand. You need like a lot of people using it, because this halving effect is not replicated in other cryptocurrencies like Litecoin. So if you study Bitcoin's halving, it's always up. It's halving. The price of the Bitcoin is always higher than the previous one. So for me, the regulation, economic regulation of Bitcoin is a deflationary offer and a deflationary demand. This is very curious. This not happens with gold, for instance. So that there isn't halving of gold, but we have halving of Bitcoin, and this is very clever. I understand. So Bitcoin is very clever. So for me, changing Bitcoin for me can be a mistake, but we can introduce some minor changes. For instance, sometimes we think here in bugs to introduce some small changes, but you can regulate, for instance, that if a Bitcoin has been hacked, a piece of Bitcoin, you can introduce a code that you can recover it. You can introduce in the code through a
By hacked, you mean kind of like somebody lost the private keys or
something like that.
Private keys were stolen. Okay, yeah.
But this is the way we have to solve these problems of hacking or whatever that happens in the code. You need to introduce justice mechanism systems within the code. If that is impossible, but we need that. Sooner or later, we need that. I don't know if.
Well, can you just explain why would that be needed?
So imagine that the case of Bybit is very interesting. We were discussing this in Bugs. We have an online chat about it, and we got one conclusion, that is that if imagine that you can introduce in Ethereum. In Ethereum is more clear than in Bitcoin, because in the end Bitcoin is going to be there. I keep my Bitcoins, and in 100 years I will start selling them, for instance. This is like the typical case. But in Ethereum, no, because you are going to make your own tokens. There are a lot of DeFi structure and so on. But in the Bybit case, imagine that you introduce in the Ethereum code the option of recover your Ethereums when they are stolen or hacked or phishing or whatever they do. You have a call to a legal oracle. You go to the legal oracle, and it's a tribunal. So tribunal has to apply public law of arbitration. So you can do whatever you want. Okay, this is important. And so you can say, okay, in your case, we have been an arbitrator. I have studied your case. It's true. Your tokens have been hacked. So I'm going to press this button. That is my sentence. And your tokens will go back to, perhaps not your wallet because it has been wrong used, but to another wallet. That you can do that. We can rule that way. We should rule that way.
It's interesting because I certainly see the benefits. I guess the counter argument may be like, how do we ensure that power, because that can be a very strong power to be able to reverse transactions or move Bitcoin around. How do we ensure that power is not abused and that it stays just in a way, right?
Yes. For me, that's crucial because many of the problems of blockchains are the breaches or the oracles. If you exploit the oracle, then you can enter into the blockchain. So that's how many of the hacks happens. So you have to make, our idea is, of course, having rules, but there are two options. First one is that you can choose your arbitrator. So because we are talking about peer-to-peer solving disputes mechanism. So we have to respect this peer-to-peer view. And second, in the case of this problem of a hacked, of course, you need to have, you can, I don't know how to do it, but in general, you have the option of reject I don't know, it's not, you cannot reject. If you accept the rules, you're accepting the rules. So yes, there's something we have to work on. Of course, there are some principles that arbitrators must follow, but for me, that the people can choose the arbitrator following some rules is the key. So that you don't keep power in that sense. So I am going to be the only arbitrator, or my panel is going to be the only one who is going to work here. But you need this freedom, because in
the power structures are sort of like malleable. Like they're not ossified, I guess. Like they'll pull people together as case by case. Yeah.
Yes, you need good arbitrators, and they have to do correctly, because if not, you are not going to work here anymore. So the arbitrator should be perfect doing the work. But you need an open way of solving disputes, in the sense that you need competition in the end. If not, you can trick and you can.
So you mentioned earlier, and I think I tend to agree with you that like Bitcoin code changes are very difficult to run through. I think it's the nature of the incentives for the people who are already running the nodes that they tend to also to hold Bitcoin and probably see more downside risk in any upgrades than upside benefit in most cases. So with that in mind, that it's really hard to kind of generate any changes to the code and the governance thereof. How will new legal things be formed? Do you see it happening on like layer 2s and 3s on top of the Bitcoin main chain? Or again, is it going to be more that the private law systems will be more frequently developed on things like Ethereum or other chains?
Yes, I think perhaps in Ethereum it's clear that they if they want Ethereum, Solana, or others similar, they need this justice layer because Bitcoin is the critics of Bitcoin. They say that is like a very simple technology. Yes, okay, you can only send and receive bitcoins. So, but in their simplicity is the success of Bitcoin.
Yeah, certainly.
Yes, that's it. We don't need, Bitcoin doesn't need more. It's deflationary regulation. It's the first digital law, and that's enough for me. Bitcoin I shouldn't change anything. Only perhaps introducing these options of recovering bitcoins in the case of
Theft or
wrong use, theft, or that's it. But that's the only small point. But perhaps even it's not necessary. I don't know. But in the others, is for sure is important because they are trying like to build this new community, but they don't have a justice mechanism system. So a society without justice is impossible to grow. So Bitcoin, they don't need that because it's just one bet. It's going to you think it's going to its value is going to be higher? Yes. Okay, I'm gonna buy Bitcoin. Why? Because the rules are the rules. It's a deflationary token, so I trust Bitcoin. That's it. But if you are imagine buying other sort of tokens and they are making ECOs or STOs, okay, if something is wrong, what is going to happen? Do I have a justice mechanism here? No. So you cannot grow. That's clear.
So I think you touched a little bit on tokenization earlier, and I guess this is a major theme right now. And I think intuitively it makes sense that, and when I say tokenization, I'm thinking mainly about real world assets being tokenized. So having some sort of underlying asset either in the physical world or let's say in the traditional financial world, as the case might be in terms of rights and ownership stakes in companies and options and all this sort of stuff. Like, where do you maybe see the tokenization theme and trend moving towards, and what I guess role will lawyers I guess play in that new world if you accept that more and more real world value will reside primarily in cyberspace and transact more or less in cyberspace. Yeah. So where do you see that kind of trend moving towards the next 5-10 years, and what's the changing role for lawyers and lawmakers in that space?
For me, the tokenization, right now there are like two main problems. The first one is that in general, the way we are trying to tokenize is using traditional law. So in the end, you are doing the same things with traditional law. So instead of in some sense, this way or this route for me is the same old story. So we are doing the same thing. For me, that's very boring, and that's not the essence of the internet and decentralization. Because in the end, they will give you a license, and instead of using a program, you're using blockchain. Thank you. That's not this movement. That's another idea. So okay, that's going to happen, or it's happening right now. But for me, that's not the point. Perhaps I am against the mainstream, but this is not something I like. What I like is thinking about using the traditional law to protect yourself or to bind what you are offering, and then introduce to a new way of tokenizing that is in a decentralized way with this justice mechanism system. Because we don't need in this case, I think we don't need we don't need to adapt to the traditional law to do this new way of doing things, because this is a new law that are digital laws. So what I see is that you have to bind. Of course, this is very challenging because you need to bind real assets to a token. So in some sense, you need states.
True. Yeah, because those real assets have to reside in some political jurisdiction, right? So I
In the
understand
end,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
So there is a mixture, but for me, sooner or later, decentralization will move forward. Sooner or later, perhaps it will take years, but sooner or later, that's going to happen. The simple thing is that internet is growing and growing and growing, and we can see more and more companies that are more decentralized or businesses that are more decentralized. And for me, this Bitcoin issue is the most different thing of Bitcoin is the law. So for me, we are facing a new way of ruling. So sooner or later, if we understand that we are facing a new way of ruling, more decentralized laws in the case of tokenization will appear. But we have to realize that. But internet, you cannot stop. It's unstoppable. So sooner or later, if we realize this, we will start doing proper tokenization. Or we will be ready to that. Perhaps we are not ready yet.
Do you what's your perspective on DAOs? I mean, with this trend that we're moving more and more decentralized, do you believe that more the traditional corporate structure will become less influential and will be supplanted by more DAO type structures? What are your thoughts on where DAOs might go in the coming, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
I understand that also DAOs have to progress a little bit because I don't know if they are a proper DAO. So they say there is a DAO, but in general it's like a corporation because some people keep the tokens and so the power. In general, perhaps it's not the case of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is unique. But in general, that there is a lot of problems with DAOs. So I don't trust a DAO 100%. So I am a DAO. I don't know if you're a DAO.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question. Is like, what, from your definition, like what features would actually make something a proper DAO versus just somebody branding themselves as a DAO?
More decentralized. So, for instance, from a legal perspective, they say in the USA, the SEC, they say that Bitcoin is a commodity, not a value. No, it depends on another organization, not the SEC. And Ethereum is also, they say, some people, it's not official. They say, no, yes, Ethereum is also a commodity because it's more decentralized. It's decentralized. We don't know if Ethereum is properly decentralized, but it's more decentralized than other blockchains, that for sure. But also in Mika, it's interesting. I think it's good of Mika that you have to prove that you are a proper DAO, because in general the DAOs are not decentralized. But it's also difficult because if you are not well decentralized, your project will be finished. Or perhaps you don't have the proper community ruling the DAO. So it's difficult. It's difficult.
Interesting. Yeah, and I guess we won't belabor the point, but I can understand a little bit of a mismatch if DAOs are trying to fill a bit of the space of a startup company, and by their very nature, startups tend to only be a few individuals with an aligned vision at the beginning. Anyhow, right? So by nature, they start in a centralized sort of manner. So it is a bit difficult for me to see how, in most cases, you'll be able to create a new business in a purely decentralized way. Yeah. Okay. So then if we talk about like kind of taking this discussion about the changing legal paradigm, digital assets, and the changing legal infrastructure, and we try to apply it to like a corporate lens, what types of companies or specific corporate use cases should business leaders be exploring at this stage, given the context we've discussed today? So where do you see the traction being gained today? Could it be in areas like trade finance, cross-border ventures, IP, or copyright licensing, or is it more exclusively in the kind of Web3 native companies? Are they the only ones really embracing this today?
No, I think it's necessary those companies, traditional companies, to start using these tools, but they don't know perhaps how to use them. There are some examples, as you mentioned, international payments, for instance, it's very clear that we should start using more cryptocurrencies. They don't dare. Sometimes they don't dare to use cryptocurrencies, but you can make a payment in seconds. And with banks, that's not possible. As a lawyer, I have cases of companies trying to sell and buy things, and they had a problem just because the bank changed the currency. I paid in dollars, you receive in euros, and I was asking you in dollars. So just because of that, they had an issue. That doesn't happen in cryptocurrency. So that for me is clear. And also, I think the next step for this maturity are these kind of companies starting using blockchain properly in these cases of transactions or international commerce. But they have to make up a little bit the things, like to create them, and also using arbitration. If not, it's impossible because you don't have guarantees sometimes. So it's difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm actually kind of a little bit surprised by how slow the adoption rate has been by corporations for, things like stable coins, that where the benefits are quite obvious, right? In terms of instantaneous settlement, near instantaneous, near costless transaction fees. The benefits just seem to be so blatant, and yet the adoption rate is so low. And I can imagine that part of it's the regulatory uncertainty and lack of frameworks and so forth. But it is a bit surprising how slow it has been to date for traditional businesses to embrace cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And then, I mean, maybe more generally then, like, what advice would you give to company leaders, maybe it's chief legal officers of businesses, maybe it's CEOs, boards of directors of businesses, to help them kind of prepare for this change in legal paradigm? What's your advice or call to action for these folks?
Yes, for me, I understand that it's difficult to change your mind when you are in a traditional world. Also, you have a lot of these people. They have a lot of things to do, and they need profits and so on. But for me, the challenge is to use the technology. So when you start using, you buy and sell. In general they say, I want to buy or sell, or buy Bitcoin or buy in Ethereum or Solana. More or less they say that. I don't know how to do that. But you need to know more. You need how to buy Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana. You have to understand how to use a MetaMask or a decentralized wallet. How to use, what's the difference between Bitcoin, but using and proving the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum. Can I send in my wallet Bitcoins or not? When they see and they study this, how attacks function, is something incredible when you learn these things. So I think they have to understand the practical aspects, because if
like
not,
hands-on experience and just getting exposure through self experience.
That's what we are trying also to teach in BACS. So to teach them how to use technology. We are not properly technicians because we are professionals, lawyers and entrepreneurs, but understanding how to use these things is the best way to understand all this potentiality that there is there. And that's why you will start. If you have other company that imagine that I know him, he know how to use USDT, he know how to buy USDT, I'm going to send him the money in USDT. It's very simple. But you need to study and to practice and to understand all these things, because if not, it's difficult because it's not so easy.
Yeah,
it's difficult.
Yeah, and definitely the UIs have been getting better over the previous years. I do remember using a DEX for the first time in 2020 or so, and I was and I'd been using Bitcoin for a number of years before that, but I was also quite uncertain if I was doing everything correctly, and now I feel like it's partly just getting used to them, but also I think the user experience is getting better and better and more foolproof. A few more questions before we wrap up. What are your thoughts on the digital euro? I know the ECB has talked about accelerating the release. I think they're actually targeting later this year. I'm assuming they're going to delay things like they always do. But do you think this will accelerate adoption of the more decentralized cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin, or do you see it as a substitute or a threat? What are your thoughts on the digital euro?
First of all, legal thoughts. I would like to study how they regulate CBDC in Europe to understand what they want with it, because I don't know if we know what they want with it. So if you know what's this for, I don't know. So the answers are not very clear. So I am waiting to be published and to study it. That's the first thing, because I don't know if it's going to be good or bad. Can be some people, they say it's going to be really good, fascinating, and others they said it's going to be horrible. I mentioned a little bit about this in the book. Digital law is it's an interview that Christine Lagarde received from a known person, was a false fake Zaleski, and he asked her if CBDC was to controlling European citizens. She said, yes, it is. That's what she said. I don't know if in the end this is going to happen or not, or if that's the purpose or not, but we will have to study how they approve. But it may, for me, it's strange a little bit having a CBDC. Why? I don't understand why we should use it. I don't know. So what are the functions? What are the mission of it? No, they say that it's like cash. It's the opposite of cash. CBDC is the opposite of cash. If the argument is the new cash, is a lie, clearly, because everything is controlled and monitored. It's in a blockchain.
Yeah, certainly from the tracking and the control ability, I guess it's very much opposite of cash. I guess the feature that makes it cash-like is the instantaneous settlement, right? You're no longer waiting on all the friction that goes into making a transaction and going through intermediate banks. So I can understand the kind of economic benefit of making more frictionless benefits, but I personally skew more towards, the US approach by just embracing stablecoins. The private market has already come up with the solution. And why not just let them do it, as opposed to having centralized planners try to create something that's probably going to suck. So
yes, of course. Yes, I don't know if the US stablecoin is private stablecoin or is public. That's one of my.
Well, it's private companies, but I guess they're holding. I think it's like Tether and USDC. But I guess what we're finding in the US is the government can also nationalize these companies with time. So maybe they become public with time.
Yes, no, but the thing is that we are talking again about private law. If it's private, it's respecting the rules of the internet. And it's huge. Like, we are using private stable coins. That's very strange for an state, but that's internet. So for me, that's makes more sense that using a centralized money. I understand.
Yeah, totally. And I think the US is happy for the time being, at least, because their Tether and Circle have to hold US treasuries. So they're kind of having a buyer for their debt, which I guess gives them, and then I guess their currency gets more reach globally. So last question before we part ways. Any thoughts on Bitcoin treasury companies? This is definitely a theme that we're at Orange Wheel quite involved in. Very interested in analyzing the space and seeing the different strategies that are being employed. So I'm just kind of curious from your perspective, Ignacio, do you see any sort of legal aspects that you think are interesting, or any other insightful perspectives you might have on this phenomenon?
Of treasuries companies getting Bitcoin.
Yeah, the companies like MicroStrategy, MetaPlanet. I don't know if it's a space you've been following much, but
the big ones.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen with them, but of course they know that Bitcoin is a deflationary token, and I think it's good in general for the community having big ones there, because they are going to save the project for sure. In the end, I don't know if that can mix this sort of decentralization we were talking about before, but I understand they are not going to change the core of Bitcoin. That's right. If they change it, Bitcoin will disappear, if that's clear for everyone. So they will keep, I think they are following the rules. Yes, they are keeping Bitcoins and perhaps making some sort of manipulation in the short time, but in the long term, they are expecting a rise of Bitcoin. So
yeah, I think that's part of the fundamental thesis, is that it's going to appreciate in value in euro terms better than almost any other thing. So, okay, well, very cool. Anything else we haven't covered that you'd like to?
No, I am very happy with. I think we covered a lot of things, so I am quietly satisfied.
Fantastic. No, but I'm really excited about the new book. I guess it was released just this summer, so I'm excited to get an English version and pour over it. And we will provided in the description of the video where to find you. I guess maybe is it best to get, how should people get in touch or find your work if they're interested?
Yes, I can send you perhaps my email and information of my association, and also a link of the book that is in Amazon right now.
Fantastic.
So you can write down that.
We'll put that in the description. So thank you so much for your time, Ignacio. It was great to learn about this great phenomenon and perspective about the internet, not just being a network, but also being a new legal jurisdiction and the implications that has for Bitcoin and other digital assets. So it's been a very insightful discussion, and hope to have you back on the pod in a few months' time or something and discuss this topic in more detail.
Yes. Thank you so much for your time and for your interest, and for having Bitcoin Digital Law. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. All the best.